It was a peaceful Sunday morning in Springfield, with the sun just beginning to warm the park benches downtown. Birds chirped in the nearby trees, and the occasional jogger passed by, enjoying the crisp morning air. James Wilson, a distinguished-looking 72-year-old gentleman in a pressed gray suit, sat quietly on his favorite bench near the fountain. He came here every Sunday before church, finding peace in watching the city wake up. The elderly man adjusted his glasses and reached into his briefcase to retrieve the morning newspaper. His salt and pepper hair and kind eyes reflected wisdom earned through decades of service to his community. Little did he know that his peaceful morning was about to take a dramatic turn. Two police officers, Brad Thompson and Mike Reynolds, were patrolling the area in their squad car. Thompson, known among his colleagues for his aggressive approach, spotted Wilson sitting alone. Without any legitimate reason, Thompson nudged his partner and said, "Look at that. Seems suspicious to me." Reynolds, who was newer to the force, hesitated. "He's just reading the paper, Brad. What's suspicious about that?" "You'll learn," Thompson replied with a knowing look. "Always trust your gut." The officers pulled their car to the curb and approached Wilson. The elderly man looked up from his newspaper, offering a polite smile. "Good morning, officers. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Thompson ignored the greeting. "Sir, we need to see some identification. What are you doing here?" Wilson's smile faded slightly, but he remained courteous. "I'm just enjoying the morning before heading to church. I've been coming to this spot for years." He slowly reached for his pocket. "My wallet is right here. Keep your hands where I can see them." Thompson suddenly shouted, his hand moving to his belt. Several people walking by stopped to watch the scene unfold. Wilson froze, confusion evident on his face. "Officer, I'm simply getting my identification as you requested. Step away from the bench. Now." Thompson's voice grew louder, drawing more attention from passers-by. An elderly woman who recognized Wilson called out, "Officers, that's Mr. Wilson. He's lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. He's not doing anything wrong." Thompson ignored her. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Wilson slowly stood, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "Officer, there seems to be a misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to show you my identification." "That's it. You're resisting," Thompson declared, grabbing Wilson's arm roughly and spinning him around. The newspaper fell to the ground, pages scattering in the breeze. "Brad, maybe we should." Reynolds started to protest, but Thompson cut him off. "Back me up here, rookie," Thompson snapped as he pulled out his handcuffs. More people gathered, some recording the incident on their phones. Wilson remained calm, even as the cold metal clicked around his wrists. "Officers, I assure you this is a mistake. I am James Wilson, a retired federal judge. I have done nothing wrong." Thompson laughed dismissively. "Sure you are, and I'm the president. Save your stories for the station." A young man in the growing crowd shouted, "This is wrong. He wasn't doing anything." Another voice added, "Leave him alone. We know Judge Wilson." But Thompson was determined to assert his authority. He roughly guided Wilson toward the patrol car, ignoring the protests from the community members who had gathered. Wilson walked with dignity, his head held high despite the circumstances. As they placed him in the back seat, Wilson spoke once more, his voice steady and clear. "Officer Thompson, you're making a serious error. This will not end well for you." Thompson smirked as he closed the car door. "We'll see about that, old man." The patrol car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a crowd of concerned citizens. Some were already making phone calls, while others continued recording. Little did Officers Thompson and Reynolds know that their morning was about to take an unexpected turn that would change their careers forever. The patrol car moved through the quiet Sunday streets, with Judge Wilson sitting calmly in the back seat despite the uncomfortable handcuffs. Through the window, he watched familiar neighborhoods pass by, places where he had lived and worked for decades. His mind remained clear, knowing that truth would eventually prevail. Officer Thompson drove with a smug expression, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at his prisoner. "So, Judge Wilson, what kind of judge were you?" "Traffic court," he mocked, drawing a nervous chuckle from his partner Reynolds. Wilson responded with quiet dignity. "Federal District Court, Eastern Division. 35 years on the bench before retirement." Thompson rolled his eyes. Right, and I suppose you know the mayor too. Actually, yes. We serve on the library board together, Wilson replied matter-of-factly. The officers exchanged amused glances, clearly not believing a word. Meanwhile, back at the park, the crowd had grown larger. Several community members were already making calls to local news stations and posting on social media about the incident. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the local bakery, was on her phone with the mayor's office. Yes, they just arrested Judge Wilson, right here in Memorial Park, for no reason at all. Another witness, a young law student named David, was speaking to a local reporter. I've studied Judge Wilson's cases in school. He's a civil rights legend. This is outrageous. Back in the patrol car, Wilson tried once more to reason with the officers. Gentlemen, I understand you're doing your job, but this situation can be resolved quickly if you simply verify my identity. Thompson's response was dismissive. Save it for booking, old man. As they pulled into the police station parking lot, Wilson noticed several civilian cars already there. News traveled fast in Springfield, and concerned citizens had begun gathering outside the station. Inside, Desk Sergeant Emily Martinez was finishing up some paperwork when the officers brought Wilson through the doors. Got ourselves a real character here, Emily, Thompson announced loudly. Claims he's some big-shot judge. Martinez looked up from her computer, and her eyes widened in recognition. She had attended several community events where Judge Wilson had spoken about justice reform. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began typing his name into the system. Officers, she said carefully, what exactly is the charge here? Suspicious behavior, resisting arrest, Thompson replied confidently. The usual. As Martinez continued processing the intake, her screen filled with information that made her heart skip a beat. Awards, commendations, and most importantly, his current status as a respected member of the judicial community. She glanced at the emergency contact information and saw names that made her stomach drop. Excuse me for a moment, she said, her voice slightly shaky. She picked up the phone and dialed the shift supervisor's extension. Captain Roberts, you need to come to booking immediately. It's urgent. While Martinez made her call, other officers in the station began to take notice. Detective Lisa Chen, who was grabbing coffee, did a double take when she saw Wilson in handcuffs. She had testified in his courtroom years ago and remembered his fair but firm approach to justice. Is that Judge Wilson? She whispered to another detective. Word spread quickly through the station. Officers who had been going about their morning routines stopped to stare. Some pulled out their phones to look up his image online, confirming their suspicions. Thompson, still oblivious to the growing tension, continued his mockery. So, Your Honor, which prison would you prefer? We have several options. Wilson remained composed, his eyes showing more sadness than anger. Officer Thompson, I've spent my career ensuring that justice is served fairly. What you're doing today goes against everything our system stands for. Just then, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Captain Roberts appeared, his face already showing concern. Behind him, several senior officers followed, their expressions ranging from shock to worry. What's going on here? Roberts demanded, though the sinking feeling in his stomach told him he already knew the answer. Martinez stood up from her desk, holding the printout of Wilson's information. Sir, we have a situation. These officers have arrested Judge James Wilson. The color drained from Roberts' face as he looked at the distinguished gentleman in handcuffs, then back at Thompson and Reynolds. The reality of the situation was beginning to dawn on everyone in the room, except for the two arresting officers who still wore confident smacks. The atmosphere in the police station booking area had shifted dramatically. What started as a routine Sunday morning had transformed into a scene of growing panic and realization. Desk Sergeant Emily Martinez held the printout with trembling hands as she showed it to Captain Roberts. Sir, Judge Wilson isn't just any retired judge, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work in civil rights. His daughter is our state's Attorney General. Captain Roberts felt his mouth go dry. He looked at the distinguished gentleman standing patiently in handcuffs, then back at Officers Thompson and Reynolds, who were still unaware of the gravity of their mistake. Thompson, Reynolds, Roberts said sharply, step into my office. Now. But Captain, we need to process this arrest, Thompson protested, still not grasping the situation. Now, Robert's voice echoed through the station, causing everyone to freeze. As the officers reluctantly followed their captain, Martinez approached Judge Wilson. "Your Honor, I am so sorry. Can I get you some water?" "A chair?" Wilson smiled kindly at her. "Thank you, young lady. Water would be nice." Meanwhile, in the captain's office, Roberts was pulling up files on his computer. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" he asked, his face growing redder by the second. Thompson shrugged. "Some old guy acting suspicious in the park. Claims he's a judge." Roberts turned his computer screen toward them. There, in full color, was Judge Wilson's official portrait from the federal courthouse, along with a long list of his accomplishments. Below it was a recent photo of him shaking hands with the president. Reynolds went pale. "Oh no. Oh no, no, no." Thompson's confident demeanor finally cracked. That can't be the same person." "It is," Roberts said through gritted teeth. "You've just arrested one of the most respected legal minds in the country. A man who literally wrote the book on police reform." Back in the booking area, word had spread throughout the entire station. Officers were gathering, whispering among themselves. Some were already on their phones, calling supervisors and union representatives. The morning shift commander had arrived, looking equally horrified. Detective Chen approached Wilson respectfully. "Judge Wilson, I testified in your courtroom 5 years ago. The Henderson case. You probably don't remember." "Detective Chen," Wilson interrupted with a warm smile. "Of course I remember. You gave excellent testimony. How is your mother's bakery doing?" Chen was touched that he remembered such a personal detail. "It's doing well, sir. Thank you for asking." Just then, the front doors of the station burst open. A woman in her early 40s, wearing a business suit despite it being Sunday, strode in with purpose. Several people recognized her immediately as Patricia Wilson Clark, the state attorney general. "Where is my father?" she demanded, her voice carrying authority that made everyone straighten up. Martinez hurried over. "Ma'am, he's right here. We're handling the situation." Patricia's eyes found her father, still in handcuffs, and her expression turned from worry to fury. "Who is responsible for this?" At that moment, Captain Roberts emerged from his office, followed by 2 very pale officers. The captain's face was a mixture of embarrassment and dread. "Ms. Wilson Clark, I cannot express how sorry." "Save it, Captain," Patricia cut him off. "I want those handcuffs off my father immediately." Roberts nodded frantically and personally rushed to remove the handcuffs from Judge Wilson's wrists. As the metal restraints fell away, Wilson rubbed his wrists gently, maintaining his composure despite the ordeal. "Patricia, dear, there's no need for all this fuss," Wilson said calmly. "Dad, they arrested you for sitting on a park bench," she replied, her voice shaking with controlled anger. "This is exactly the kind of injustice you spent your career fighting against." The station had become eerily quiet. Every officer present knew they were witnessing a moment that would have serious consequences. Thompson and Reynolds stood frozen, finally understanding the magnitude of their actions. "Your Honor," Captain Roberts began, his voice trembling, "on behalf of the entire department, I offer our sincerest apologies. This is inexcusable." Wilson adjusted his suit jacket and looked around at the gathered officers. Despite everything that had happened, his eyes held no malice, only a deep sadness for what the morning's events represented. "Captain Roberts," Wilson said quietly, "I believe we need to have a serious conversation about training and procedures in your department." The captain nodded solemnly, knowing that this conversation would be just the beginning of a long and difficult process ahead. The tense silence in the police station was suddenly broken by the sound of screeching tires outside. Through the glass doors, everyone could see a black SUV come to an abrupt stop in the parking lot. Chief Robert Anderson, still wearing his golf attire from his interrupted Sunday morning, burst through the entrance with an urgency that made everyone step back. His eyes immediately found Judge Wilson, and the color drained from his face. The horror in his expression was unmistakable. This wasn't just any mistake. This was a catastrophe of the highest order. "James," Chief Anderson's voice cracked as he approached. "Dear God, what have they done?" Judge Wilson turned to face the chief, and for a moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. They had known each other for over 20 years, ever since Anderson was a young lieutenant and Wilson had mentored him through a difficult case involving police accountability. "Robert," Wilson said calmly, "it seems your officers need better training." Chief Anderson's hands visibly shook as he approached his old friend. Without hesitation, he reached out and grasped Wilson's hands. "I am so sorry. This is unforgivable." The chief then turned to Thompson and Reynolds, his face transforming from apologetic to furious. "You too, my office. Now." But before they could move, Anderson noticed the red marks on Wilson's wrists from the handcuffs. His horror deepened. "They'd actually put you in cuffs?" "James, It's all right, Robert," Wilson said gently. "Though I must say the irony isn't lost on me. I spent decades ensuring fair treatment for all, and here I am, experiencing firsthand what I've fought against." Patricia Wilson Clark stepped forward. "Chief Anderson, this isn't just about my father. This is about every person who's been profiled and mistreated by your officers." Anderson nodded gravely. "You're absolutely right, Patricia. This stops today." He turned to address the entire room. "Everyone, listen carefully. What happened this morning is exactly what we cannot allow in this department." The chief's phone began buzzing incessantly. He glanced at it and winced. "The mayor, the governor, they already know." He looked at Wilson apologetically. "James, I know this doesn't begin to make up for what happened, but please, let me at least offer you a proper apology in my office." Wilson considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, Robert, but I want Officers Thompson and Reynolds present. This needs to be a learning moment." As they walked toward the chief's office, Anderson personally held the door open for Wilson. The respect and deference in his actions were obvious to everyone watching. Thompson and Reynolds followed behind, their earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by the crushing weight of their mistake. Inside the office, Anderson gestured for Wilson to take his own chair behind the desk. "Please, James, you've earned the seat of authority here today." Wilson declined gracefully. "No, Robert, you're the chief, but I do expect you to exercise that authority appropriately after today." Anderson sat down heavily, looking every bit his age. "James, you have to understand, I had no idea this could happen. If I had known—" "That's precisely the problem," Wilson interrupted gently. "It shouldn't matter who I am. No citizen should be treated this way, regardless of their position or background." The chief nodded, then turned to Thompson and Reynolds. "Do you understand what you've done? This man, Judge James Wilson, revolutionized police practices in this state. He's the reason we have body cameras. He's the reason we have civilian oversight. He's dedicated his life to making law enforcement better, fairer, more just." Thompson stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Reynolds looked like he might be sick. "Judge Wilson personally trained me when I was starting out," Anderson continued. "He taught me that the badge is a privilege, not a right. That our duty is to protect and serve everyone, not to profile and prejudge." Wilson spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of his years on the bench. "Chief Anderson, what concerns me most is that these officers felt comfortable acting this way. That suggests a deeper problem in your department's culture." Anderson's shoulders slumped. "You're right, and I take full responsibility. This is a failure of leadership, my leadership." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the morning's events settled over everyone. Outside the office, officers and staff watched through the glass windows, knowing they were witnessing a pivotal moment in their department's history. As the morning sun climbed higher, the full scope of Judge Wilson's legacy began to unfold in Chief Anderson's office. The chief pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer, his hands still trembling slightly as he opened it. "Officers Thompson and Reynolds," Anderson began, his voice heavy with disappointment, "let me tell you exactly who you arrested this morning." He spread several documents across his desk. Judge James Wilson served 35 years on the federal bench. He presided over landmark civil rights cases that changed the course of history in this country. Patricia stepped forward, adding, "My father drafted the guidelines that every police department in this state follows. The de-escalation training you obviously ignored. He wrote it." Thompson finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. We didn't know." "That's exactly the point." Anderson's frustration boiled over. "It shouldn't matter if he's a judge, a janitor, or anyone else. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Wilson raised his hand, calling for calm. Robert, if I may. The chief nodded, and Wilson continued. Officer Thompson, you mentioned trusting your gut earlier. Tell me, what exactly made you suspicious of an elderly man reading a newspaper on a park bench? Thompson shifted uncomfortably, unable to answer. The silence spoke volumes. Let me share something with you, Wilson said, his voice taking on the measured tone he'd used in countless courtrooms. In 1978, I was a young prosecutor. I made assumptions about a defendant based solely on his appearance. Those assumptions nearly sent an innocent man to prison. That day changed my life and my approach to justice forever. The judge stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd served for decades. After that case, I dedicated myself to reforming our justice system. I established the first bias training program for law enforcement in this state. I fought for body cameras when everyone said they were too expensive. I pushed for community policing when it was just a theory in academic papers. Anderson added, the Community Relations Board that oversees this department. Judge Wilson created it. The civilian review process that investigates complaints against officers. His design. The scholarship program that helps minorities join the force. He funded it personally. Patricia pulled out her phone, showing a photo from just 2 weeks ago. This is my father receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Police Chiefs. They called him the conscience of American law enforcement. Reynolds, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Sir, I'm new to the force. I should have questioned what was happening. I failed you in the badge. Wilson turned from the window, his expression softening. Son, admitting that is the first step toward becoming the officer this community needs. The chief's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it and sighed. The governor wants to speak with you personally, James, and the mayor is holding an emergency press conference in an hour. Tell them to wait, Wilson said firmly. Right now, we need to focus on solutions, not politics. He looked directly at Thompson and Reynolds. I want you both to understand something. This badge, he pointed to Thompson's chest, represents a sacred trust. When you put it on, you promise to protect everyone, not just those who look like you or live in neighborhoods like yours. Anderson stood up. Judge Wilson, what can we do to make this right? How do we fix this? Wilson smiled slightly. You can't undo what happened this morning, Robert, but you can use it as a catalyst for real change. I was coming to the park to think about a proposal I plan to present to the mayor this afternoon, a comprehensive reform package for community policing initiatives. The chief leaned forward. We're listening. First, every officer needs to spend time in the communities they serve, not just patrolling, but participating. Second, we need to revamp the training program to focus on implicit bias and de-escalation. Third, we need accountability measures that actually work. As Wilson outlined his vision, even Thompson and Reynolds found themselves nodding. The horror of the morning was transforming into something else, an opportunity for meaningful change. In the days following the incident, Springfield Police Department became the center of national attention. News vans lined the street outside the station, and reporters from across the country sought interviews with everyone involved. But Judge Wilson, true to his character, refused to seek revenge or publicity. Instead, he focused on turning this painful moment into meaningful change. The first emergency meeting was held just 2 days after the arrest. The conference room was packed with city officials, community leaders, and police representatives. Judge Wilson sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding respect without saying a word. Mayor Richardson opened the meeting. Judge Wilson, on behalf of our city, I want to formally apologize for what happened. We failed you, and we failed our community. Wilson nodded graciously. Mayor, I appreciate your words, but apologies alone won't prevent this from happening again. We need action. Chief Anderson stood up, holding a thick document. We've already begun implementing changes. Officers Thompson and Reynolds have been suspended pending a full investigation, but more importantly, we're overhauling our entire training program. Patricia Wilson Clark, who had taken lead from her duties as Attorney General to support her father, added, we're not just looking at individual officers. We're examining systemic issues that allowed this to happen. Over the next week, Judge Wilson worked tirelessly with the department. He personally led training sessions, sharing his experiences from the bench and his own journey in understanding bias. Officers who had served for decades found themselves learning alongside rookies, all humbled by Wilson's wisdom and patience. During one session, Wilson shared a powerful story. In 1985, I sentenced a young man to prison. Years later, I discovered evidence that proved his innocence. That mistake haunts me to this day. It taught me that we must always question our assumptions, always seek the truth beyond what we think we see. The local news captured Thompson's public apology, which became a defining moment. Standing before cameras, the officer who had arrested Wilson spoke with genuine remorse. "I let my prejudices guide my actions. I failed Judge Wilson, I failed my badge, and I failed my community. I'm committed to earning back that trust." Wilson stood beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Redemption is possible for those who truly seek it. Officer Thompson has agreed to become part of our new training program, sharing his experience to help other officers avoid similar mistakes. The reforms were swift and comprehensive. Within a month, the department had implemented mandatory bias awareness training for all officers, community engagement programs where officers spent time in neighborhoods they served, a new oversight committee with civilian members, regular town halls where residents could voice concerns directly to police leadership, a mentorship program pairing experienced officers with community leaders. The transformation wasn't limited to Springfield. Other cities began adopting Wilson's reform model. The Wilson Protocol, as it became known, set new standards for community policing across the nation. 3 months after the incident, the department held a ceremony to unveil a new training center named in Judge Wilson's honor. As he cut the ribbon, Wilson addressed the crowd of officers, officials, and community members. "This building represents more than bricks and mortar," he said. "It represents our commitment to justice, equality, and understanding. Every officer who trains here will learn not just tactics and procedures, but empathy and respect." Thompson, now reinstated after completing extensive retraining, approached Wilson after the ceremony. "Judge Wilson, I want you to know that I think about that morning every day. It's made me a better officer and a better person." Wilson smiled warmly. "That's all I ever wanted, son. Not punishment, but growth. Not revenge, but reform." The media coverage shifted from scandal to inspiration. National news programs featured Springfield as a model for police reform. Chief Anderson appeared on talk shows, crediting Wilson's wisdom and forgiveness for the department's transformation. In his office one evening, Wilson sat with his daughter, reflecting on the whirlwind of changes. "You know, Patricia, sometimes the worst moments in our lives can become catalysts for the greatest good." She squeezed his hand. "Only because you chose to make it so, Dad. Most people would have sought revenge. You sought reform." "That's what justice is really about," Wilson replied. "Not punishment, but making things better for everyone who comes after us." 6 months had passed since that fateful Sunday morning. The Springfield Police Department headquarters buzzed with activity as preparations were underway for a historic event. Banners hung from the walls announcing the first annual conference on eliminating racial profiling, and officers from departments across the country filled the auditorium. Judge Wilson stood backstage, adjusting his tie and reviewing his keynote speech. Chief Anderson approached him with a nervous smile. "Ready to make history again, James?" Wilson chuckled. "Robert, at my age, every day is history. But yes, I'm ready to share what we've learned." As Wilson took the stage, the packed auditorium fell silent. Among the hundreds of attendees sat Officer Brad Thompson, now wearing a special instructor's badge. His transformation had become legendary within the department, from the officer who made the arrest to one of the program's most dedicated advocates for change. 6 months ago, Wilson began, his voice strong and clear. "I experienced firsthand what too many in our communities face daily. But today, we're not here to dwell on that morning. We're here to celebrate how far we've come and chart the path forward." The presentation showcased Springfield's remarkable transformation. Crime rates had dropped, community trust had soared, and the department had become a national model for reform. Wilson presented statistics, shared success stories, and outlined the comprehensive training program that now bore his name. During the break, Thompson found himself surrounded by officers from other departments, all wanting to hear his story. It was the worst day of my career, he admitted honestly. But Judge Wilson taught me that our mistakes don't define us, our response to them does. In the hallway, a young African-American officer approached Wilson. Judge, I joined the force because of what happened here. Your response inspired me to be part of the solution. Wilson beamed. That's exactly what we hoped for. Change happens when good people step forward. The afternoon session featured a panel discussion with community leaders, police officials, and civil rights advocates. Patricia Wilson Clark moderated, skillfully guiding the conversation toward practical solutions. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions and sharing their own experiences. As the conference neared its end, Chief Anderson took the stage for a special announcement. Today, we're launching the Wilson Fellowship Program, providing full scholarships for minority candidates to join our police academy. Judge Wilson has personally endowed this program to ensure diverse voices in law enforcement for generations to come. The auditorium erupted in applause. Wilson stood, humbled by the recognition, and made his way to the podium one final time. As he looked out at the crowd, he noticed Thompson in the front row, tears in his eyes. Officer Thompson, Wilson called out, "Would you join me up here?" Thompson hesitated, then slowly made his way to the stage. The two men who had met under such difficult circumstances now stood side by side, symbols of reconciliation and progress. This man, Wilson said, placing his hand on Thompson's shoulder, has shown more courage in facing his mistakes than most people show in their entire careers. He's proven that change is possible when we open our hearts and minds. Thompson, his voice thick with emotion, addressed the crowd. Judge Wilson didn't just forgive me, he invested in me. He saw potential where others saw failure. That's the kind of leadership that transforms communities. As the conference concluded, attendees lined up to shake Wilson's hand, take photos, and pledge to implement similar reforms in their departments. News crews captured the historic moment, broadcasting images of unity and hope across the nation. That evening, as Wilson sat in his study at home, Patricia brought him a cup of tea. You know, Dad, most people would have used that incident to tear down the system. You used it to build something better. Wilson smiled, looking at the framed photo on his desk, a picture from the conference showing him and Thompson shaking hands. That's the thing about justice, Patricia. It's not about winning or losing. It's about making tomorrow better than today. Outside, the city lights twinkled peacefully. In police stations across Springfield, officers began their shifts with a new understanding of their role. The morning that had started with an arrest had sparked a movement, proving that even in our darkest moments, the choice to forgive and reform can light the way to a brighter future. The Wilson Protocol had become more than just a training program. It was a testament to the power of turning adversity into opportunity, prejudice into understanding, and conflict into compassion.